Ambassador, as you just heard Danielle talking about, the Kremlin has said it's not going to comment until the crash is investigated completely. But at the same time, spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has been out, making some comments, and we've heard some other implications from the Russians saying, oh, there were Ukrainian drones in the area. What is your take on all of this, and how could Russia's involvement, especially given the relationship with Kazakhstan and who might be doing this investigation, how does Russia's involvement complicate all of that?
It complicates it a lot because clearly the one thing we are never going to hear coming out of Moscow is that they were responsible for this airplane falling out of the sky because they shot it down. They have done this before, whether it was MH17 in Ukraine back in 2014 or the Korean airliner in 1983. Russia is not training its people in the way it should in order to be able to conduct the kind of operations in a civilian environment, and in fact, they don't care. So the complication is that both Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan have links to Russia, which are important to them for a whole variety of reasons, which will make it difficult for them to come out plainly and say what everyone now very much thinks has been the case, that this was an accident, which happens, that it was a mistake because they didn't close the airspace over Grozny when they were conducting military operations, and leave it at that. I don't think that's going to happen because the Russians, particularly Vladimir Putin, is not someone who is interested in criticism, let alone in claiming error when error is clearly on the Russians' fault, on the Russian side here.
Yeah, we were speaking earlier about that MH17 flight that was downed, likely by Russian-backed forces in the Donbass of Ukraine. After a long investigation, concluded that's who was at fault. The Kremlin never admitted fault there. And aviation experts we were speaking to earlier also pointed out that the Kazakh government may not have the resources to do things like analyze black boxes or some of this more technical stuff, and are likely deferring to Moscow for those investigations, which, as you just talked about, could be complicated, to say the least. I also want to ask you, I don't know if it will have any impact, but given the global optics of this event and everything else that's going on, do you think this will have any impact on Russia in Ukraine, on where that war is going or how they fight it?
No, unfortunately not. You would hope that they care about civilian casualties and people dying in war, particularly through mistakes made by their own military. But in the way that Russia has conducted this war over the past almost 3 years now, civilian casualties is not high on their list of priorities. We've seen this with Russia repeatedly, including in Syria, where we're now seeing some of the devastation be emerging from the regime that Russia backed and the bombing that it inflicted in Syria before the resumption of the civil war. So I don't think, unfortunately, that this will have much an impact. I do hope it will have an impact on Western policy and continued support for Ukraine, including for the incoming administration and the incoming president, who has hesitated in the past to characterize this war as a war of aggression, which is what it is, who has hesitated to make clear that the United States and the world stands with Ukraine, and that winning this war, defeating Russia, making sure that Russia does not gain militarily and politically from the use of force, is in America's fundamental national interest. And we've seen the brutality of this regime. The fact that it is not willing to even acknowledge that perhaps a mistake just demonstrates that there are people who should not be supported, who should not be backed. And I think Vladimir Putin is one of those people, and hopefully this will have some impact in Mar-a-Lago and in the president when he becomes president on the 20th of January.
Yeah, I know one of the fears with G7 nations and NATO nations is not necessarily that incoming President Trump will fight against their efforts towards Ukraine, but without that really strong, unwavering voice of the U.S. in support of it, that coalition could potentially fall apart. I asked Secretary Blinken this a couple of weeks ago. He said he believed it will endure. I'm curious to get your take. Can that coalition hold itself together without all the support coming from the U.S.?
Well, it'll be more difficult because the United States is the big gorilla in this support, militarily and financially, although the Europeans and others are also doing a significant amount of support. But for the Europeans, and I would hope for the United States, there has to be an understanding that Russia is at war not just in Ukraine, it's at war with us. We are seeing all kinds of Military activities, although done by criminal organizations or in the case of the cutting of critical communication links and pipelines across the Baltic Sea by private, so-called privately owned ships, by their Chinese or others, but they're all designed for creating an atmosphere of fear and an atmosphere of terror and an atmosphere in which Russia is trying to undermine the unity of the West. And the one thing that it has not understood and that has kept it back up till now is that the West has remained united. And so, I will repeat, I do hope that the incoming administration understands that we are facing a man who is determined to undermine not just what's happening in Ukraine, but undermine European and ultimately American security. And that stopping him now is what's really necessary.